If you followed our previous Tekno RC vehicle builds, you'll know we've built several of these high quality differentials, and to be fair, there's little difference with the build here with the Tekno RC SCT410 2.0 Kit Bag A. Before we get stuck into Kit Bag A, note that we will also need our fluids and grease. In particular, we will need the 15,000 CST oil along with the black grease. The rest can be placed to one side for later in the build. Okay, so now we're ready for the contents of Bag A. Particularly impressed with these heavy duty differential outdrives which have less material removed for improved durability and impact resistance. These new outdrives will be ideal for running in harsh conditions. That said, we'll get straight on with construction, and we'll start with the main diff cup, where we'll apply a little bit of grease to the inside recess where the O-ring will eventually sit, before placing a bearing around the bottom opening of the cup. Tolerances are tight, so push on and ensure it can turn freely. Next, grab an outdrive and apply some grease around the groove on its neck, before sliding it through the bottom of the diff cup. With one of the two supplied O-rings greased, place into the neck of the outdrive and push right down to the bottom of the diff cup, which we pre-greased a moment ago. You'll find it useful to use some needle nose pliers or another blunt object to push it right down. Now we can lay down one of the two differential shims down on top, before inserting one of the two outdrive pins into the hole in the neck of the outdrive. Again, you'll need some needle nose pliers to help here. Next, get a few drops of the 15,000 weight oil into the empty cup, just enough to line the bottom, before dropping the first gear into place. And with the gear sitting flush in position, give the outdrive a turn to verify the gear is secure. With that done, I like to fill the cup with a little more oil, enough for the first gear to be almost covered, and let it rest for a moment while we move on to the next step. The Tekno wheel wrench, although not required for this build, acts as a great holder in the meantime. So now we're ready for our gear set. With the differential crosspin in hand, proceed to feed each of the 4 smaller gear pins into each end, with the teeth facing inwards, making sure they all turn freely, before dropping into the previously prepared diff cup, lining up with the grooves in the cup, so that the outer gears mesh with the bottom gear. We can now top off with more oil, trying to get into all the tiny gaps, until all gears are just about covered, around 1mm from the top, leaving just enough space for the final gear to rest on top. We can place the cup to one side for a moment now for the oil to settle, and we turn our attention to preparing the spur gear. Just as we did with the diff cup, we begin with inserting some grease into the O-ring notch of the spur gear, as well as around the notch within the neck of the remaining outdrive. Next, place a bearing on the outer side of the spur gear, before feeding the outdrive through, wiping any excess grease as we go and using it to grease the O-ring, which now gets placed around the outdrive and into position by the spur gear, after which we place the final shim into position on top, and push through the remaining outdrive pin to keep everything in place. All we have left now is the small gasket seal, which we need to coat with grease on both sides, before placing into position around the top of the diff cup. Now we can proceed to seal the differential, although we need to be careful to not only line up the screw holes without moving the gasket from its position at all, but also to ensure the outdrive pin is seated within the top gear. Screw down the first 2 screws opposite to each other, although do not tighten just yet, and then do the same with the 2 remaining screws. If you use an electric driver, keep it on its lowest torque setting and take it slowly, and always finish off by hand, since we want to tighten each opposing screw a little at a time, taking care not to over tighten, just enough so that they're snug. Over tightening will not only cause the internal gears to bind up. Considering the spur gear is plastic, you don't want to squash one side of the spur gear and deform it slightly. And that's it, first bag complete. Center differential built with the precision and high quality we've come to expect from Tekno. Place it to one side for now and move on to bag B, which carries the exact same process to create another 2 additional differentials. The only difference between bags is the ring gear that seals the differential cup rather than a spur gear, but other than the shape of the gear, the remaining parts are precisely the same. At this point, I like to label the first differential, C15, which tells me this is the center differential with the 15,000 weight oil. After creating another differential, again using the exact same process as the first, so scroll back on the video if you need to see it again, resulting in a second differential with the ring gear rather than a spur gear, and this one is labelled up F15, so front differential with 15,000 weight oil. And finally, note that when building the final differential we want to fill using the 10,000 weight oil this time round, otherwise the process is again the same, and this unit gets a label of R10 for rear differential with 10,000 weight oil. And with that, that's bags A and B complete, and all three differentials ready and built. We've also marked each so it's easy to distinguish the front from the rear. You really do not want to get these mixed up considering they carry different weight oil. We'll start getting these differentials into their housings next with kit bag C, the front gearbox assembly.